President Biden, the United States president, has just met with Poland's president as he wraps up a visit to Europe, a visit intended to bolster unity over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The U.S. President Joe Biden's trip came even as there were indications that Moscow might be scaling back its military ambitions. U.S. President Joe Biden, wrapping up a three-day trip to Europe on Saturday, reinforced Washington's commitment to NATO in the face of the Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion or Russia's invasion of Ukraine. His comments came even as Russian military forces signaled that Moscow might be narrowing its military objective. The U.S. president has been in Europe for the past 3 days for unprecedented emergency summits in Brussels with NATO members, where Western leaders have showed a united front against Russia's invasion.
And you're dealing every day with Vladimir Putin. I mean, look at what he's done to these people. What does it make you think?
He's a butcher.
All right, so the U.S. President Joe Biden has held 3 days of emergency meetings with allies where Western leaders have showed a united front against Russia's invasion. This at a time when Russia's army says that the first phase of its military campaign in Ukraine is over and that it will now focus on the eastern Donbass region. So tonight on Left, Right and Center, we're asking, is this a shift in Russia's strategy? Is this change, this new emphasis, an admission by Moscow that its pre-war strategy has failed? Is the Russian military having to change its plans, perhaps even reduce the scale of Moscow's ambitions in Ukraine? For more on this, we have joining us is Mr. Vishnu Prakash, former spokesperson of the MEA, former ambassador posted in Russia and the United States. We'll go across to Moscow and get Katya Gaika, head of the New Media Association in Moscow, former deputy director of the Skolkovo Innovation Center based in Nemchinovka in Novosibirsk Oblast. We'll also get Ruslan Bortnik, director of the Ukrainian Institute of Politics, and also joining us right now, Professor Anuradha Chinoy, former chairperson, Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies at JNU. Thank you so much. Mr. Vishnu Prakash, first to you. Moscow signaling that it's going to focus on territory claimed by Russian-backed separatists in the east. What should one make of this? Is Russia scaling back ambitions? Is this after or because attacks elsewhere have been stalled?
Sarah, good evening and nice to be on the program with you. This is the first possible step towards de-escalation. Russia's advance has clearly been stalled. I must add that despite the misinformation campaign or the PSYOPs, Russia did exercise restraint, and now the choice was to use massive air power to pulverize Ukraine or to review the stance. They have mercifully decided, so it seems, to review it and to take a step back. They have clearly lowered their sights, and now they are talking of concentrating on eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region, basically to create a buffer. So if this position holds, then it would perhaps create some kind of a meeting ground for meaningful negotiations between the two sides, because we remember their initial aim was to destroy the military infrastructure of Ukraine and to bring about a regime change. So clearly there is a shift in position, and if this is the case, it has not come a day too soon. I only hope that they will not be taunted, they will not be provoked, and this kind of a face saver will be allowed so that things can cool down in all directions. Sarah.
Ms. Chinoy, would you agree? Do you think this could be a watershed moment? This could be the way out that everyone has been looking for that, that moment where we can tip over into de-escalation?
I agree, because I think Russia first tried to get more, push for more. And when there was this resistance, this was their basic demand. Their demands were two: neutrality and a buffer for the eastern part. And I think they have now stepped back. I agree with what Mr. Vishnu Prakash said. And this is a non-humiliating kind of position for both. Ukraine can also accept it and they can also accept it. Of course, if there's any break in Ukraine, it will be painful for the Ukrainian. But, it's better than Kiev falling and a humiliating surrender for them, or a long defeat, a long kind of terror position for the Russians, and a long and slow war. So this would be really the best for all sides concerned.
So this would make it easier for Vladimir Putin to claim a face saver. So, Mr. Prakash, just again to push a little more, can one read into this that Russia does not have the ability to continue sustained large-scale offensive operations, that this is, stretched too long, there are logistical problems, manpower issues, and the Ukrainian resistance was really underestimated?
Sarah, what I'm going to say is with hindsight, and the vision, as you know, is 2020. So it is clearly that Russia had overestimated its own abilities and underestimated three things: the resolve of Ukraine, the resolve of Europe, and the determination of President Biden to resist and to push back very hard. The kind of weaponry that has been pumped into Ukraine, the kind of sanctions that have been imposed on Russia are unprecedented. It also clearly shows that the combined power or punch of the West is formidable still. And that is something that Russia would not have bargained for. They can still press ahead. They are a very powerful nation, but at what cost? There is international condemnation, economy is in a tailspin, public opinion even within Russia is changing. So I think it is a wise thing, I would say, not to press ahead, not to cause further death and destruction, and hopefully scale back. I wonder whether that kind of a honorable exit, if it were to happen, will be allowed to him by the West, because it would seem that now the agenda, or perhaps it looks that the agenda of the West is to bring about a regime change in Russia. Now, if that is the case, they may not allow that to happen, but I really hope that since there is a move to de-escalate, all sides kind of agree to that and come back to the negotiating table in a meaningful fashion.
All right. So interesting. So you're not just that Russia underestimate the resistance on the ground from Ukrainian forces, but you're also saying it underestimated that the West would come together. I want to touch upon that and move across to that. But before that, Ms. Chinoy, if I can just play devil's advocate, right? Should one be cautious in believing too quickly or too prematurely that Russia has abandoned plans to seize the rest of Ukraine, right? Ukraine is actually fighting against one of the biggest armies in the world, right? Would one be naive to ignore that too soon? In the coming days, if you see a shift of a focus to Donbass, does that mean that Moscow has actually abandoned wider ambitions?
I think right from the beginning, Moscow didn't have the ambitions to get all of Ukraine. I don't think they're that stupid. They did want the East, and this is what they've got. And now if they're allowed to, retain the East and have this honorable exit, it would be good. But if the West doesn't allow it, this propaganda war or this war, the war of vision and television would turn against the West. So I think Russia has taken a smart move now. Finally, it is, it is better, not such a strategic miscalculation as the earlier ones. Therefore, all sides now should really jump in and have a peace deal, so that there is peace. As it is, there has been far too much damage on a small country, and I don't think the Russians whether Russia or Europe can actually afford any more. It's very unfair.
Devastating. All right. I have Ruslan Botnik joining us. He's the director of the Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Mr. Botnik, I'm not sure if you heard what we've been talking about. Is this a de-escalation? Is this an admission by Russia that its pre-war strategy, or it miscalculated, it underestimated the resistance of the Ukrainian forces? But I want to ask you this, Mr. Ruslan Botnik. If Moscow has concluded that it makes more sense to concentrate for the time being on achieving, let's say, one objective at a time, and it's going to focus on the east, then it is more likely to concentrate its power from the air. We have been seeing for weeks Ukraine has been demanding that the US and NATO increase the military assistance they are providing. President Zelensky has been repeatedly asking for that no-fly zone. But even in these talks that took place in Brussels this week, NATO members really don't seem to have warmed up to that idea.
Hello, colleagues. Unfortunately, no, Russia is not going to stop your intervention, but after the month of war, Russia needs to show the success. And I think the last statement from Russian side that the main goal of this operation was Donbass. It's an attempt to show the success of Russian troops and Russian strategy to Ukraine. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that Russia is ready to obtain only Donbass, and Russia declined the plans for occupation of all the Ukrainian country. I don't think so. It's temporary statement for showing a temporary success, as I understand. Of course, after the month of war, we should state that we have some kind of war balance. From the one side, Russia is not successful in pure blitzkrieg war. From the other side, Ukraine is very successful in the land battlefield, but lose its own air, and it's not possible to defend from the rocket struggle, and the NATO countries are trying to find the way to defend themselves, and they are not ready to help effectively for Ukraine.
All right, we seem to have some trouble listening in to our guest from Ukraine. I'm going to try and fix that. But meanwhile, Mr. Vishnu Prakash, I want to go across to what you mentioned, that Russia may have underestimated the fact that the Western forces could come together. Today, we heard the US President Joe Biden saying that he thinks the Russian leader Vladimir Putin has been surprised to find that he has not been able to divide NATO allies in their reaction to his invasion of Poland. Would you say that perhaps, Joe Biden himself has been surprised by that, because we've seen numerous problems. We've seen him just meeting with the Poland head, and recently, in the last few years, we've seen the rise of right-wing populism in Poland. That has been putting it on the conflict course with Europe, with the European Union and with Washington. Yet, we're seeing now, because of this threat of Russia, them all coming together. Has this surprised not just Russia?
Why is it that President, Vice President, NSA, Secretary of State, all have had to come to Poland? I don't think that they have come just for tourism. They have had a hard time persuading Poland to play ball. You remember they had requested Poland to give MiG-29s, and Poland said, well, you take it and you give it.
Correct.
Germany has had difficulties following these sanctions or kind of adopting all the sanctions. France has had difficulties.
Correct.
So it is not that everybody is on the same page, but there are two things. One, I must say that President Biden has led from the front. He has worked the phone. He has been persuasive. He has kind of used all the instruments available to him to at least forge a kind of a common front. How long it will endure is anybody's guess, but yes, they are seemingly speaking in one voice. But there is a reality. The reality is that US is transatlantic. Europe, Western Europe is in the same geography as Russia.
Correct.
Russia and they are neighbors. There is a lot of trade, commerce. So Western Europe does not want to make an enemy of Russia. But it will all depend on how this pans out, because the kind of death and destruction that has taken place, whatever the reason, I mean, granted, it was provoked by eastward movement of NATO, but invasion is not the solution. And if this madness lasts longer, it will become that much more difficult for Europe to kind of again mend bridges with Russia. Question really is whether they will put a halt to it. I hope they do.
All right. So, Anuradha Chinoy, same question to you then. When Joe Biden says that Russia has been surprised by how NATO has come together, is Joe Biden, putting on a brave face? Is that the reality?
No, in a sense, NATO has consolidated. It was there were a lot of differences between France and the US and Germany and the US. And they still are on the issue of gas and sanctions. So the US has also, been pressurized not to put sanctions on oil and gas on Europe and elsewhere. So there have been these pushes and pulls in NATO, but overall, militarily at least, they are united that this war must end. And after that, the issue of sanctions can be debated in different ways. So, yes, NATO has consolidated right now on this issue, on the issue of just the immediate war behind Biden.
All right. Thank you so much to Mr. Vishnu Prakash, Anuradha Chinoy for your time, for your analysis. Is this a moment? Could this be a watershed moment? Is this the moment of de-escalation that everyone had been searching for? Thank you for joining us on Left, Right and Centre tonight.